Okay, we are going to read aloud the Kennedy-Nixon opening statements for this debate. You should have this document open on your computer. As we go through the video, we will pause after sections and then you will come back to your document to add your marginal notes. That way you'll be able to turn this in the next section of the lesson and complete your assignment. So let's get started. Nixon-Kennedy opening statements. John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon first televised debate, opening statements, Chicago, September 26, 1960. Starting here. Senator Kennedy, so that means that he's the one who is speaking. Mr. Smith, Mr. Nixon, in the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln said the question was whether this nation could exist half slave or half free. In the election of 1960, and with the world around us, the question is whether the world will exist half slave or half free, whether it will move in the direction of freedom, in the direction of the road that we are taking, or whether it will move in the direction of slavery. I think it will depend in great measure upon what we do here in the United States, on the kind of society that we build, on the kind of strength that we maintain. We discussed tonight domestic issues, but I would not want that I'm going to go back and reread. I am right here at but I would not want that I would not want that to be any implication to be given that this does not involve directly our struggle with Mr. Khrushchev for survival. Okay, so I, as a reader, struggled significantly with this last section of the text here. And so as a reader, I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at that sentence again to make sure that I'm really understanding it, because this happens to the best of us. So we discussed tonight domestic issues, which means issues that are pertinent to us or relevant to us here in our country. We call that domestic issues, our country issues. But I would not want that to be any implication to be given that this does not involve directly our struggle with Mr. Khrushchev for survival, or talking about Russia and the battle with Russia. So thinking about the time period here, we have 1960. We still have a strong civil rights movement taking place, or even more like the beginning of the civil rights movement taking place, people getting involved, looking for change. And we also have the Cold War. We're in this battle and fear with Russia about, weapons of mass destruction and what could be done. And so there was a lot of fear and a lot of upheaval and a lot of change. And that's what he's talking about in this paragraph here. He's reflecting on the times, basically. So stop here, pause the video, and go and add your marginal notes in for this first paragraph, and then we'll come back. Okay, welcome back. Mr. Khrushchev is in New York, and he maintains the communist offensive throughout the world because of the productive power of the Soviet Union itself. The Chinese communists have always had a large population, but they are important and dangerous now because they are mounting a major effort within their own country. The kind of country we have here, the kind of society we have, this kind of strength we build in the United States will be the defense of freedom. If we do well here, if we meet our obligations, if we're moving ahead, then I think freedom will be secure around the world. If we fail, then freedom fails. So what is he talking about here? He's making a comparison between communist governments, who he believes are not free, and the type of freedom we need to gain here in the United States. So jump over to your document and add in your marginal notes. Welcome back. I'm just going to scroll the page up here and we'll continue at therefore. Therefore, I think the question before the American people is, are we doing as much as we can do? Are we as strong as we should be? Are we as strong as we must be if we're going to maintain our independence, and if we're going to maintain and hold out the hand of friendship to those who look to us for assistance, to those who look to us for survival? I should make it very clear that I do not think we're doing enough, that I am not satisfied as an American with the progress that we're making. Let's combine these two paragraphs together. So basically he's saying we're not doing enough to maintain freedom. Let's add on. This is a great country, but I think it could be a greater country. And this is a powerful country, but I think it could be a more powerful country. I'm not satisfied to have 50% of our steel mill capacity unused. I'm not satisfied when the United States had last year the lowest rate of economic growth of any major industrialized society in the world. Because economic growth means strength and vitality. It means we're able to sustain our defenses. It means we're able to meet our commitments abroad. Okay, so he's saying the things that we're not able to do. Okay, our industry is not growing. Our economic growth isn't growing as fast as it should. So take these two sections here and add up your marginal notes. You may want to go back and skim and reread, and then create a quick summary. What is Kennedy saying in these two paragraphs here? And then come back to the video and we'll continue on. Okay, continuing on. Okay, sorry. I'm not satisfied when we have over $9 billion worth of food, some of it rotting, even though there is a hungry world, and even though 4 million Americans wait every month for a food package from the government, which averages 5 cents a day per individual. I saw cases in West Virginia, here in the United States, where children took home part of their school lunch in order to feed their families because I don't think we're meeting our obligations toward these Americans. So here in America, people are starving while other food goes to waste. Let's continue with this paragraph and then we'll add our marginal notes. I'm not satisfied when the Soviet Union is turning out twice as many scientists and engineers as we are. I'm not satisfied when many of our teachers are inadequately paid, or when our children go to school part-time shifts. When our children go to school part-time shifts. I think we should have an educational system second to none. I'm not satisfied when I see men like Jimmy Hoffa, in charge of the largest union in the United States, still free. So let's actually stop here, because there's a lot happening here, and we'll make our marginal notes here, and then we'll continue on to the next page. But he's talking up here, okay, about the food resources and food going to waste and children not getting their needs met. Then he starts talking a little bit differently about what else we're lacking. The Soviet Union is producing scientists and engineers, and we're not producing quite as many. He's talking about undervalued or underpaid educational systems and children who are not going to school full-time. Jimmy Hoffa, this is kind of an allusion to something that was happening at that time, but let's just say that he was not really a good person. And he was in charge of something that was supposed to be really good and wholesome. So add in your marginal notes here for these two paragraphs, and then we'll continue on right here when we come back. Okay, continuing on with I'm not satisfied. I'm not satisfied when we are failing to develop the natural resources of the United States to the fullest. Page 2. Here in the United States, which developed the Tennessee Valley and which built the Great Coulee and other dams in the Northwest United States at the present rate of hydropower production, and that is a hallmark of an industrialized society, the Soviet Union by 1975 will be producing more power than we are. These are all the things, I think, in this country that we can make our society strong and can mean that it stands still. So again, he's listing just a few more things. He's comparing and contrasting us to the Soviet Union, which happened quite a bit during the 60s. But he's saying the Soviet Union or Russia, is producing more power. They're doing more. We had developed these dams which help produce power, but it's not enough is what he's saying. We need to be doing more. Let's add these two paragraphs together. Let's continue on. I'm not satisfied until every American enjoys his full constitutional rights. If a Negro baby is born, and this is true also of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans in some of our cities, he has about 1/2 as much chance to get through high school as a white baby. He has 1/3 as much chance to get through college as a white student. He has about 1/3 as much chance to be a professional man. Oh, sorry. To be a professional man, and about 1/2 as much chance to own a house. He has about 4 times as much chance that he'll be out of work in his life as a white baby. So he is going from making comparisons between the United States and the Soviet Union, and now he's continuing to make a comparison, but changing gears to talk about what's happening here in America with racism. And this, 1960s, this was very, very prevalent. So I want you to go back to your marginal notes, and these are almost kind of separate. So maybe have one here about his comparison with the Soviet Union, and one here about the comparison between what he's saying, the white baby and the Negro baby. And then we'll come back and we'll start with, I think we can do better. Okay, I think we can do better. I don't want the talents of any American to go to waste. I know that there are those who want to turn everything over to the government. I don't at all. I want the individuals to meet their responsibilities, and I want the states to meet their responsibilities. But I think there is also a national responsibility. The argument has been used against every piece of social legislation in the last 25 years. The people of the United States individually could not have developed the Tennessee Valley. Collectively, they could have. A cotton farmer in Georgia, or a peanut farmer, or a dairy farmer in Wisconsin and Minnesota, he cannot protect himself against the forces of supply and demand in the marketplace, but working together in effective governmental programs, he can do so. 17 million Americans who live over 65 on an average Social Security check of about $78 a month. They're not able to sustain themselves individually, but they can sustain themselves through the Social Security system. I don't believe in big government, but I believe in effective governmental action. And I think that's the only way the United States is going to maintain its freedom. It's the only way that we're going to move ahead. So one of the big arguments of the time was big federal government versus small federal government. What that means is, should the federal government kind of enact all of these laws that every single state should have to follow no matter what? That's a big government. They're in control of a lot of things. And some people believe in small federal government where the states have more rights and the states have more laws and they get to decide, and so each state can kind of do things differently. So he's saying, well, I don't believe in big federal government. I do believe that these big government programs are helping people, and he lists a few of them here. Okay, about how farmers, they can't succeed on their own individually, even within the states. They need a federal government program to help them. He mentions Social Security for elderly, that they can't get enough money on their own, but with Social Security, a big government program, they can. So this is a big paragraph. Let's head on over to your marginal notes or your document and add in your marginal notes here. What is he talking about when he says big government? Okay. Okay, let's continue on here with I think. I think we can do a better job. I think we're going to have to do a better job if we're going to meet the responsibilities which time and events have placed upon us. We cannot turn the job over to anyone else. If the United States fails, then the whole cause of freedom fails. And I think it depends in great measure on what we do here in this country. The reason Franklin Roosevelt was a good neighbor in Latin America was because he was a good neighbor in the United States. Because they felt that the American society was moving again. I want us to recapture that image. I want people in Latin America and Africa and Asia to start to look to America, to see how we are doing things, to wonder what the resident of the United States is doing, and not to look at Khrushchev or look at the Chinese communists. That is the obligation upon our generation. So, there's a little bit of history here that you may not be as familiar with, talking about Franklin Roosevelt and what he did in Latin America, but pay attention instead to here, okay, this section here. I want people in Latin America and Africa and Asia to look to America, not to the Soviet Union or Russia or to Chinese communists. What does that mean? What is he saying? Come back over to your marginal notes and add them in here. What do you think he's saying here in this section? And then we'll move on. Okay, we're going to move on. I'm just going to scroll up here, and we're here in 1933. Okay, in 1933, Franklin Roosevelt said in his inaugural that this generation of Americans has a rendezvous, yes, has a rendezvous with destiny, which means we are going to meet destiny. I think our generation of Americans has the same rendezvous. The question now is, can freedom be maintained under the most severe attack it has ever known? I wonder if this means the most severe attack it has ever known. Okay, can maintain them. I'm going to go back and try to make sense of it, and I want you to kind of think throughout, what is Miss Brown doing? Can freedom be maintained under the most severe attack it has ever known? So the most severe attack it's ever known. I think it can be, and I think in the final analysis it depends upon what we do here. I think it's time America started moving again. Okay. Let's continue on to the next section. I don't feel like I made enough meaning from this paragraph to be able to write marginal notes, so let's keep going. Mr. Smith, and this means that he is talking, the moderator. And now the opening statement by Vice President Richard M. Nixon. Okay, that means we're going to move on to Nixon, and that means Kennedy is done. So I think we need to go back here and summarize what is it that Kennedy is saying here. We have to meet our destiny. So let's pause and let's actually go over and add in our marginal notes here, since this makes sense to have a nice little break here and switch gears. And when we come back, we'll start with Mr. Nixon's opening statements. Okay, let's get started with what Mr. Nixon thinks. So up here at the top, Mr. Nixon. Okay, first he addresses the moderator and the opponent, so Mr. Smith, Senator Kennedy. The things that Senator Kennedy has said, many of us can agree with. There is no question but that we cannot discuss our internal affairs in the United States without recognizing that they have a tremendous bearing on our international position. There is no question but that this nation cannot stand still, because we are in a deadly competition, a competition not only with the men in the Kremlin, but the men in Peking. So those are cities referencing, so talking about the Soviet Union again and China again. So right now we're ahead. We are ahead in this competition, as Senator Kennedy, I think, has implied. But when you're in a race, I'm going to come down here, the only way to stay ahead is to move ahead, and I subscribe completely to the spirit that Senator Kennedy has expressed tonight, the spirit that the United States should move ahead. So what is Kennedy saying in this first paragraph about moving ahead? Head on over to your marginal notes and we'll continue on with where then. Okay, so we're going to start up here at where then. Where, then, do we disagree? I think we disagree on the implication of his remarks tonight and on the statements that he has made on many occasions during his campaign to the effect that the United States has been standing still. We heard tonight, for example, the statement made that our growth in national product last year was the lowest of any industrialized nation in the world. Now, last year, of course, was 1958. I thought this was 1960, but okay. That happened to be a recession year. But when we look at the growth of GNP this year, a year of recovery, we find that it's 6 9/10% and one of the highest in the world today. More about that later. So he contrasts Kennedy's statement. Remember, Kennedy had said our growth is very low. And what Nixon's saying is it was in 1958, but now that we're coming back and our government is doing better, it's one of the highest. So go back to your marginal notes and summarize. How does he contrast Kennedy? What does he say that opposes Kennedy? Okay, we're at looking then. Looking then to solve this problem of how the United States should move ahead and where the United States is moving, I think it is well that we take the advice of a very famous campaigner. Let's look at the record. Is the United States standing still? Is it true that this administration, as Senator Kennedy has charged, has been an administration of retreat, of defeat, of stagnation, or standing still? Is it true that, as far as this country is concerned, in the field of electric power, in all the fields that he has mentioned, we have not been moving ahead? Well, we have a comparison that we can make. We have the record of the Truman administration of 7.5 years and the 7.5 years of the Eisenhower administration, 2 previous presidents. When we compare these 2 records in the areas that Senator Kennedy has discussed tonight, I think we find that America has been moving ahead. So he says, when we look at the past 2 presidents and their administration, what they have done, he believes they're moving ahead. Let's combine, even though it's a long paragraph, let's combine that with this paragraph here. Okay. Let's take schools. Let's take schools. We have built more schools in these last 7.5 years than we built in the previous 7.5, for that matter, in the previous 20 years. Let's take hydroelectric power. We have developed more hydroelectric power in these 7.5 years than was developed in any previous administration in history. Let's take hospitals. We find that more have been built in this administration than in the previous administration. The same is true of highways. So let's combine these 2 paragraphs together. What is Kennedy saying? How is he opposing what is Nixon saying, and how is he opposing Kennedy? Kennedy says we're standing still. What is Nixon saying? He's saying nope, and look at what we've done. Okay, so add your marginal notes in for this section, and then we'll come back to let's put. Okay, let's put it in terms that all of us can understand. We often hear gross national product discussed, and in that respect, may I say that when we compare the growth in this administration with that of the previous administration, then there was a total growth of 11% over 7 years. In this administration, there has been a total growth of 19% over 7 years. That shows that there has been more growth in this administration than in its predecessor. Let's add these 2 paragraphs together. We're going to start with but. But let's not put it there. Let's put it in terms of the average family. What has happened to you? We find that your wages have gone up 5 times as much in the Eisenhower administration as they did in the Truman administration. What about the prices you pay? We find that the prices you pay went up 5 times as much in the Truman administration as they did in the Eisenhower administration. What's the net result of this? This means that the average family income went up 15% in the Eisenhower years as against 2% in the Truman years. Now that is not standing still. Okay, so what is he doing? He's saying the Eisenhower administration, which is the same party line as Nixon. So like, hey, if you trust in this party, you trust in me. Look what we did under Eisenhower, who was our president. Okay, and he's saying what? Look at these last couple sentences here. Head over to your marginal notes here and tell me what's happening here. Okay, go back and kind of reread and summarize. What is Nixon saying? Okay, he's making a lot of comparisons about the previous administration, about what Eisenhower did. Okay, we're going to continue on with but I'm just going to scroll up here. Okay, but good as this record is, may I emphasize it isn't enough. A record is never something to stand on. It's something to build on. And in building on this record, I believe that we have the secret for progress. We know the way to progress. I think, first of all, our own record paves that way, proves that we know the way. Senator Kennedy has suggested that he believes he knows the way. I respect the certainty which he makes that suggestion. But on the other hand, when we look at the various programs that he offers, they do not seem to be new. They seem to be simply retreads of the programs of the Truman administration which preceded it. And I would suggest that during the course of the evening he might indicate those areas in which his programs are new, where they will mean more progress than we had then. So, what is Nixon saying here? He's saying, well, we have a good record, but we're going to keep building on it. This record proves we know what we're doing. And even though Kennedy says, oh, I have these new programs and they're great, they're really just part of the Truman administration, which Nixon is really talking down upon. He did it up here too, right? Eisenhower was good and Truman was bad. The growth with Eisenhower was good. The growth with Truman was bad. So again, he's kind of making a direct, not insult, but, connection to Kennedy and saying, Kennedy's just going to say and do everything that Truman did. And look, I've already told you Eisenhower was better. Okay. So kind of summarize, what is he really saying in this paragraph here? And then we'll move on to what kind of programs are we for? Okay, I'm just scrolling to the top here and we'll start at what kind of programs are we for? We are for programs that will expand educational opportunities, that will give all Americans their equal chance for education, for all of the things which are necessary and dear to the hearts of our people. We are for programs, in addition, which will see that our medical care for the aged is much better handled than in its present time. So I'm just going to pause here. Remember, this is a speech, so it's really reflecting if he pauses and changes his wording. Okay, starting at here again. Here again, may I indicate that Senator Kennedy and I are not in disagreement as to the aims. We both want to help the old people. We want to see that they do have adequate medical care. The question is the means. I think that the means that I advocate will reach the goal better than the means that he advocates. Let's combine that with this. Okay, so he's talking about the programs. He wants to expand the educational program, healthcare for the elderly, but I'm going to do it better than Kennedy. That's what he's saying here. So maybe we should just pop over and add our marginal notes here on this paragraph. Add that in, and then we'll come back to I could give. Okay, I could give better examples, but for whatever it is, whether it's in the field of housing or health or medical care or schools or the development of electric power, we have programs which we believe will move America, move her forward, and build on the wonderful record that we have made over these past 7.5 years. Now, when we look at these programs, might I suggest that in evaluating them, we often have the tendency to say that the test of a program is how much you're spending. So he's saying, let's look at the programs we already have, but generally when we look at them, we're like, well, how much are we spending on them, basically? Let's combine that with this. I will concede that in all the areas to which I have referred, Senator Kennedy would have the federal government spend more than I would have it spend. So Kennedy would spend more on programs than I would. I costed out the cost of Democratic platform. It runs a minimum of $13.2 billion a year more than we are presently spending to a maximum of $18 billion a year more than we are presently spending. Now the Republican platform, which is Nixon, will cost more too. It will cost a minimum of $4 billion a year more, a maximum of $4.9 billion a year more than we are presently spending. So he's talking about the programs. I want to offer these programs, but let's look at how much we're spending. And his big, argument right here is this. So come back to this section and let's summarize these two paragraphs. What is Nixon's argument? What is he saying? Okay. How is he contrasting Kennedy? Right here. And then come back and we'll read now. Okay, now does this mean that his program is better than ours? Not at all. Because it isn't a question of how much the federal government spends. It isn't a question of which government does the most. It's a question of which administration does the right thing. In our case, I do believe that our programs will stimulate the creative energies of 180 million free Americans. I believe the programs that Senator Kennedy advocates will have a tendency to stifle those creative energies. I believe, in other words, that this program would lead to the stagnation of the motive power that we need in this country to get progress. So whenever somebody says, like, in other words, it's almost like they're going to summarize their thought or their argument. So I believe, in other words, what is he saying? Let's come over. We have just two more marginal notes left, this one and one more. So let's add these marginal notes. What is he saying about the government under Nixon if he were to win? What is he saying? Okay, let's continue on. The final point that I would like to make is this. Senator Kennedy has suggested in his speeches that we lack compassion for the poor, for the old, and for others that are unfortunate. Let us understand throughout this campaign that his motives and mine are sincere. I know what it means to be poor. I know what it means to see people who are unemployed. I know Senator Kennedy feels as deeply about these problems as I do. But our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach these goals. So what is he saying? Okay, Kennedy's platform was, let's help the poor, let's help, African Americans get their rights, let's help everybody be free and live equally, let's make sure everybody has jobs, that no one goes hungry. And so, Nixon's saying, hey, I think those are all important too. I know what it means to be poor, but we want to get there in different ways. We want to help people in different ways. So summarize these thoughts here. Before you jump over to add your final marginal notes, let's just read out the closing of this. Mr. Smith, the moderator, says, "Thank you, Mr. Nixon. That completes the opening statements. And now the candidates will answer questions or comment upon another's answers to questions put by correspondents of the networks. The correspondents. I'm Charles Warren, Mutual News. I'm Stuart. And So basically, the opening statements of the debate, that's what we just read, and then the debate continues on with questions, and if you've ever kind of seen debate, they go back and forth and essentially argue professionally. So head on over to your document, add in your final marginal note here. You do not need to put one for this paragraph here, and then you're going to turn this document in, make sure you save it, turn this document into the Dropbox in the very next section of the lesson. The lesson continues on though. Make sure you keep going because the next sections of the lesson check your understanding and make sure you understand what you read so that you can be tested on it tomorrow. So make sure you go through all parts of those lessons. Okay. If you have any questions or need any help with any of the assignments, please let me know. Take care.